welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for coming. Would you like to introduce yourself and your business?
Sure. So my name is Liv, or Olivia, and I'm the CEO and founder of Persi. Persi is an AI stylist and a personalisation layer is kind of how we describe it. And essentially we plug into fashion websites and we create complete shoppable outfits based on what you tell me it matches your style, what you already own in your wardrobe, and what you're shopping for in that moment.
Amazing. And so where did you come up with the idea?
Oh gosh, long story, Grace. So I guess it makes most sense to kind of take you back where my previous background is in sort of brand marketing and communications for fashion and retail brands. So I did a lot of jewelry, I did the likes of House of Fraser and Reese and fashion, and I did a bit of beauty. And ultimately my focus was, how do we acquire our customers? How do we engage and convert them? And how do we retain them? And I think through this journey, and also from my shopping addiction, I have very much a late night shopping addiction, particularly after a wine. It's great. I just realized that when I was being recommended anything, the online kind of experience was not personal. And everyone was speaking about all these sort of new layers of personalization. You're getting all these recommendations. And I was like, I'm being shown the same thing, either what I've just bought, or I'm being shown something because they've shot it one way. And half the time then when I looked at that item or that outfit, I was like, it's not really my style. And then maybe if I did like something, that would be out of stock. Or I was being shown something because, let's say you previously bought these jeans, I then bought these jeans, and therefore they're recommending me the top that you bought. Well, we are two different people with two different styles, and therefore I want to be shown something that matches me as an individual and not based on past behavior or very limited data.
Amazing. And so when did you realize that this was something actually worth building?
It has sort of iterated over time and actually begun around made-to-order menswear using personalization tech, which was the original idea of my previous co-founder, which I then kind of nurtured. And we pivoted, he stepped away, and then I ended up landing on a B2B offering that was focused on women's wear initially and was actually more around allowing people to shop using their wardrobe and asking them directly what they were looking for in that moment. It was probably about 3, maybe even 4 years until we actually got to where we are. And I think at that point, I was also getting feedback. I was asking people, I was doing loads of focus groups. I was speaking to the retailers that I was consulting for in that moment, because I ended my kind of last stint of my career as a consultant for about 7 years. And I think ultimately just really trying to shape and evolve what I believed was what you now know to be Persi. And the reality was, I ended up having to stitch together what we call an MVP, a minimal viable product, just to prove that shoppers would shop this way. And ultimately that would then unlock my conversations with retailers to prove that they would pay me to allow their shoppers to shop that way.
Amazing. And so you've perfectly gone on to my next topic, which is MVPs. So minimal viable products, for anyone that doesn't know. And so how do you get an idea from an idea to an MVP? What are sort of the steps that you went through?
So I think through this kind of founder journey, I've done a lot of accelerators, and I very much was understanding the process at which you should go about building a business. And I think the most important thing that came across was, how can you prove that your idea is what people want with the least amount of effort and least amount of cost? So for me, the challenge lay around the fact that my concept was fully scoped around AI and technology. And if anyone knows me, I struggle to turn my laptop on sometimes. So I didn't have that technical sort of knowledge or experience. And so for me, the idea was, right, I need to fundraise in order to build that. Because either it was me giving away part of my business to someone that I probably didn't know yet and have the relationship. And obviously I'd already been through a co-founder situation, or to an agency where I'd be giving away too much of my business that will impact me in my future journey. So I actually was on an accelerator with Plexel and I was having a mentoring session. I was like, so obviously I need to fundraise in order to do this. And James from a company called Lunos that really focused on market validation was like, no, you don't, Liv. And I was like, well, yeah, I do, because I can't build something technical. And he said, you just need to simulate what your product will do. And I was like, how the hell am I going to do that? So I went away and I kind of, through the process of what I was sort of saying the AI would do, I just broke it down. And I think ultimately I knew that although the customer was not my shopper, if I could get them to use this product, I could prove that the product delivered a certain amount of outcome. Also, if I could get them to pay for the product, it would really unlock my conversation with retailers and then investors. So I was like, sent a text on a Monday morning, hadn't even built the MVP at this point. And I sent it to a couple of groups of like women that I had, that was probably like a couple of hundred on there. And I was like, I'm looking for women who want to send me a picture of 3 items in their wardrobe that I can then build complete looks around that they can then shop. And immediately I was inundated and I was like, okay, this is great. So I actually added a paywall, and it was a simple like link to a PayPal. And it was a minimum of £5, pay what you want. Because again, I didn't know what these people were going to pay. And I thought it would give me a gauge of like what that looks like. And once I got those people in, I simply created a tally form So how could I capture the information I needed? So it was a quiz where I asked you about your style, your favorite brands. I asked you to upload those 3 items, just an image. It was like laying on the bed or hanging up on the back of a door. And then I asked you what occasions you wanted me to build the looks for. What I then did was, based on that information, I started to go shopping. And I did a lot of shopping. And I was basically shopping until midnight for about 2 months, to my husband's despair. I mean, I quite liked it because I ended up finding a load of stuff that I then liked. And what I did was I started to create these outfits on PowerPoint and kind of lay them out in a way that was very appeasing and kind of gave the best reflection of what a look might be if it was on me. I would then screenshot that. I put it onto a Notion page, which you can actually publish. So I could send someone a private link, which feels like their own website. And it would basically be like, hi, Grace, thanks so much. Here are your style words. Here are your favorite brands. Here are your 3 items. And here are your 6 looks, including them with links to buy. And then at the end, I was like, could you give me 2 more minutes of your time to answer a couple more questions? And that was another tally. And that basically was like, how accurate was, the styling? Did you purchase anything? If so, how much? Would you use Persi again? And all of that data basically was already sort of validating. So I got a 96% style accuracy. We had an 88% purchase intent. Something like 54, I think, percent had already purchased 1 to 6 items, and the rest were planning on. They just did the feedback immediately. And 90% would use Persi again.
Amazing.
So I took that to then a retailer, a rental platform, and I said, look, I now need to prove that a retailer will use this. And I said, but I can't put it on your website because I can't manage the demand because it's just me. And she was like, let's send out an email to our lapsed customers of 12 months. And I, being a marketer, I was like, well, that's not going to work. Who is going to respond to a company they haven't responded to in 12 months with the offer of a styling experience that they've never heard of?
Yeah.
But from that, we got a 40% click through to their recommendations, and we got a 6% conversion rate, which in retail is amazing. So all of that basically validated that customers wanted a more personal way of shopping. They were willing to tell me upfront some more information about themselves in order to get that. And that resulted in a higher conversion rate than currently was being seen. And that was all I need in order to then go out and get my investment.
Amazing. And so how long did that process take you from putting the WhatsApp messages on to going, okay, this is our actual product that needs to be built?
It was a 2-month period that I did the consumer MVP. It then was about a month that I did the B2B, the retailer one. And then I had to direct my focus towards fundraising. So like I said, I then launched my fundraise. I was raising 350. And I think because of all that traction and the journey I'd been on, which I took a lot of people on through LinkedIn, as well as people I'd met, I'd send them monthly updates as to what I was doing. It meant that when I was raising, I had a lot more interest than perhaps I had previously when I went out. And I went out with 350, and within a couple of weeks, I had 670 on the table. And I had 2 lead investors that were happy to both come in. They wanted me to raise more money because of the current state of fundraising, which I agreed to at a higher valuation. And then I asked to ring fence the final 50 and go on LinkedIn to find female angels. Something I'm very passionate about. And I think a lot of the challenges that female founders come up against is because we're not seeing women on the other side of the table.
Yeah.
A lot of women think that they need huge amounts of cash in order to invest, and it feels like it's a barrier. And additionally, they were going to be my first adopters. So I felt very passionate. And within a day, I had 10 calls booked in, and I had 176K. Is that right? Yes, pledged for the 50K, which was crazy to me. So I took 8 of those women in on their lowest, sorry, I keep hitting the mic. I took 8 of those women in on their lowest ticket. Yeah. We went up to 660 and we closed. That was a period of about 3 months. And then once I had the money in the bank, which was May last year, so this time last year, I was able to bring on my CTO, which I'm sure we'll speak about, which I hadn't planned on originally, but because I overfunded, I could. We then built for 4.5 months, and then we launched our first product, which was the AI stylist, which is the closest to what the MVP that I had simulated. Again, we'll go into it in more detail, but what I then found was we launched in November, load of learnings from AI Stylist then has led us to launching a second product, which is our style gallery on PDP, which we launched 2 months ago. So we are continually testing. Matt and I think within the period of the first 3 months, he had launched something like 56 new features, products, or iterations during that time. So we are continuously looking at the data. We're tweaking it. We're trying to find a way to keep getting it closer to where we need it to be and improving the value for our retailers.
Amazing. And so a lot of people would think that fundraising takes more time than 3 months. So is there any pre-preparation you did? Were you connecting with angels and investors on LinkedIn, or were they just already in your aura?
And that sounds lovely, doesn't it? If they were just in my aura and boom, in 3 months.
Hey, raising, send me money.
Absolutely not. As I said, Persi and the previous, it had been iterating over a period of time. And during that time, I'd started to speak to investors. I'd been pitching. I was pitching when I was pregnant. I was pitching 5 weeks postpartum, continually talking to people. What that was allowing me to do was, first of all, start to understand all the different types of investors, also understand who would be right for me and at what stage I am right for them. Because a lot of VCs, for example, will take these meetings, but actually never intend on investing. They just want to see what's out there, what's happening. And for me, that is time wasting. But at the same time, there is some value in building a relationship, because if they are the right people, you're just too early. You can take them on a journey, and they're very much warm when it gets to the point of you investing at a Series A or whatever. So I, over that period of time, not only had I honed in my sort of investment approach, I knew who I should speak to. I knew who was actually interested in what I was doing. I knew what I needed in terms of traction in order to make those conversations easier. But I'd also iterated my product as well. And I had shown these people a lot of what they, I guess, invest in at this stage, which is most of the time not the idea, it's the founder. And that is because at startup stage, it is such high risk. The reality is whatever idea that we are pitching is not the idea that we will end up exiting, hopefully, in however many years, right? And what they need is to have a founder who is agile enough, doesn't have the ego that it's this way, this idea or no idea, has the resilience to deal with all of the ups and downs that we deal with. They will find a way to turn that money that their early stage investors have put in into their kind of 3 to 10x return.
Yep.
So I think what I had done during particularly the previous 8 months of having to go through closing down a previous business, I was up against a number of challenges, setting up a new one, launching an MVP, non-technical founder, getting people paying, etc., demonstrated all of those characteristics that they are looking for. And often they will ask you, are you driven or whatever? And you might be able to give them an example, but the reality is they're not seeing it in real time.
Yeah.
So I think it helped that I was, very much demonstrating what they hope to look for in a founder.
No, amazing. And so going on to your co-founder, you're obviously a tech founder without a technical background. Did you hire at the beginning, outsource, or did you go straight to your CTO straight away? At Dext, we know that running a business shouldn't be about the busy work. You've set out to build something on your own, to make time, dream big, and do more. But receipts are everywhere. Invoices get lost. Your inbox never stops. Then you're stuck trying to make the numbers make sense. Dext is the all-in-one bookkeeping automation platform. It's simple, accurate, and all in real time. Just how bookkeeping should be. Your financial data right where it needs to be, with you finally building bigger things. Go to dext.com to find out more.
Matt and I were introduced through a mutual friend who was also a founder. And I think the December before, so it must have been December 2024. And we were basically invited to this co-working space that a company called Atara had started to set up for early stage founders. They said the first Tuesday of every month, you can come and you can use our offices and we will kind of host you. And so Charlie had said to me, come along. And I was like, great. Now on the day she messaged me going, I'm in labor. I won't make it, unfortunately. So I was like, okay. And she was like, but my mate Matt's going to be there. You should still go. He does fractional CPO work. Maybe tell him a bit about what you're doing with your MVP that I was currently doing, and you can see if he can help you. Went along. It was only Matt and I that turned up.
Really?
Because it was the first time they'd done it, and I don't think a lot of people were quite flaky. And anyway, we were the only people that turned up. It was Christmas. Things happened. We ended up chatting. We went for lunch together, came back and kind of left that meeting of like, he's so nice. Like, we really get on. That's it. See you at the next one. Anyway, he couldn't make the Jan one. It came to the Fed one and I just launched my fundraise. And I was like, oh, all this stuff has happened. I've now just launched a pilot with a retailer. And he was like, oh, and I was telling him about it. He said, I think I can help you automate some of the stuff you're doing manually. I'm not going to charge you. Like, let me help you. So ended up building this whole hub that was capturing all our data. And he met me, I think like a couple of weeks later and was taking me through it. And I was like, this is amazing. And I was like, there's something here. And I just said to him, I was like, I feel like there might be something here. I know that you're setting up your consultancy and this isn't fashion, certainly wasn't the direction he was going. Data and AI was, he's a product background. And I said, but if you agree, like maybe we could see how this goes for the next couple of months. My fundraise is taking off. I might actually be able to, even if it's just consultancy, pay for your support for a bit until I get the salary income that I need to pay a full-time CTO. And he was like, let's do it. So we did that. And whilst I was going through all this journey, it probably got to about, I think, April. So we'd been working on and off together for about like 3 months. And at that point, I was like, okay, this guy is not only in my head in terms of what I want to do, but he's in my heart. He genuinely believes and sees the opportunity with Persi. It's like we're both thinking the same thing. He's thinking before I'm speaking, like all the things that you kind of want. But not only that, he speaks my language and he understands where I'm coming from as a creative founder, and he can turn that into product and tech. And I had not found that before in tech. And I felt there was always this kind of like friction between someone like myself and techies, because they either were just like, no, or they were just like, I don't get like we were miscommunicating. It was lost in translation. And so I just knew there was something here. And I just said to him, look, I would love to bring you on full time. And he agreed. So he joined me as soon as I closed my fundraise, he joined me full time. And like I said, that wasn't the plan, but I now have no idea how I would have done what we've done without him. Like the pace at which we've been able to move, the understanding, the opportunity, like honestly, I feel like I manifested him and it was all about timing. Like that is like a typical situation where it was timing where I didn't realize that I needed him. He came in and then I was able to actually like realize it as well.
Oh my God, amazing. Yeah. Love that for you. That's my dream too. There's a big difference between an MVP and then the actual end product that exists. And obviously there's so many iterations that go into it. But what was the gap was for you between the MVP and the actual product that you wanted to build? And then how did you fill the gap?
I think it's an ongoing challenge, right? The reality is what Matt needed to do was like encode my thinking as to when I receive this information, my name's Grace, I want, a everyday at work outfit that also works for drinks in the evenings. My vibe is boho, fun, whatever my favorite brands are. I don't know, free people, nobody's child, whatever. Where my mind then goes, I'm not just going to those brands, I'm going, what are the brands like that I might help her discover, but also feel heard. So I might also look at some of the brands she's mentioned, but I'm going to build a look that I feel is reflective of what she's told me. She's also told me that, she's, 5'7" and therefore sometimes struggles with, things being too long, whatever it is, like all that consideration. How do you encode that in technology? And sometimes it is a case of I look at something and it just doesn't work and I don't know why. And I think that is definitely the challenge, is scaling a product like this. And I think it's probably why it hasn't been done before. And there is so much we can do with the technology now. But I think it's an ongoing thing as to how you ensure that the level of quality that, a human can deliver through technology is maintained. I think that's a problem for so many people in so many industries as well. So, we're always honing that. And I think there is an element of like, if it's good enough to get out, like in the early stage, get it out, learn, iterate. That's very much the process we've taken rather than waiting until it's perfect. And I think it's ongoing. And, I heard, who was it? Rupa, who heads up Array of Ventures, speaking on a panel last week. And she was talking about, people talk about reaching product market fit. That's not a thing anymore. I think the whole point is you are continually iterating on what product market fit is. And it's an everlasting goal is to keep achieving that and then move to the next one. Because if you achieve product market fit and that's it, you don't innovate and we can't keep up with everything else that's going on.
100%. And how do you get feedback from what your clients want? So consumers and brands?
Yeah. So obviously with being tech, we can look at data. And one thing we're very clear on is what are the data points that we are measuring that we believe attribute to success. And initially we kind of focused on adoption. We called it adoption, conversion, and I can't remember, an average order value. So we basically were looking at how many people were going to get a recommendation, how many people were going to buy the recommendation, and then was that a higher basket size than if they didn't use Persi? And I think what we quickly realized is actually adoption was broken into two things. It was awareness of people clicking into our widget, which was our first challenge. And then it was actually knowing what the product is and the value in order to then complete the quiz. And I think we realized that actually breaking those two up, we needed to find a way to solve for both, which we did. We found that not enough people were clicking on the widget because they didn't know what it was. And therefore, there was nervousness around, mistrust of data and all of this. So we needed to find a way to show up earlier in the journey that was more intuitive, that supported kind of the entry point into Persi. So we launched a style gallery where you land on a page, let's say it's this top, and immediately I see 5 complete looks, including this top, different versatile ways to style. So I'm going, oh, great. So they shot it that way, but I don't necessarily like the way they styled it, but I love that. And actually those trousers are great. So now I'm also going to buy those, add to bag, help with discovery. And what we found is 10% of people now click into Persi because they understand what the product offering. So that was one thing. And then I think also we were very clearly looking at conversion rate and average order value, but now the way that we measure performance is revenue per session, because it actually needs to be a combination of the two. And it might be for one retailer, it's not as simple as, are you converting higher? Is it a higher basket size? It's actually, ultimately, are we driving profit at the end of the day?
Amazing. And so through a scaling business, you need customers. So when you got your investment, what was the marketing kind of flow and customer journey to get A, retailers, but also B, just consumers?
Yeah, so obviously our customer technically is the retailer. So my background lent itself to that warm network of introductions. And very much my strategy has been that founder-led approach. And I've been incredibly lucky to have so many amazing people around me that are open to making those introductions. And I would say almost every single conversation I've had has been through a warm introduction. The only one, the outlier, which is a major one, was about 3 weeks ago, I sent a cold outreach to Never Fully Dressed. And I was just like, I had been trying every different way to get an introduction. It just wasn't working. I didn't know anyone that could get in. And it was one of my real ICPs. Like, I believe that they are the brand that we really can support, and our customer wants this. And when I look at their online experience, I'm like, I know how I can add value. And I was like, do you know what? I'm just going to send it to the head of digital. And he replied almost immediately and was like, love this, let's have a call. And I was like, oh my God. And I was like, oh, well, maybe it's just like a fluke. Anyway, literally got on a call about 3 days later with the senior e-com manager. We got on like a house on fire. She was like, my priority right now is discovery in terms of more categories, because we're known very much as a dress brand, but also increasing AOV. She said, so this is exactly what I need. And I was amazing. And I said, oh, tomorrow I'm going to Pulse. She was like, me too. So she was like, give me your WhatsApp. So the next day she WhatsApps me. She's like, we're in the pub, come to the pub. So I go to the pub. I meet with the head of digital who accepted my meeting, and he said, Liv, you have no idea how much time he has come into this. He said, it just so happens, he said, look, I've got 200 requests on LinkedIn. I don't know why I opened your message. When I opened it, it was solving a problem I had. I went on your website and knew exactly what you did, booked the meeting, like head of ecom met with you, loved you as well. That's really important for them. Loved the product. Boom, signed.
Amazing.
And that never happens. So I do think that's a fluke. It still tells me it's worth it, worth trying. But for me, I think the most important thing was going, who do I know someone else, and just keep going. And having that tenacity that when they don't reply, someone said to me the other day, 7 times is the sweet spot.
Yeah.
And I'm sometimes like, it's me again. But it does work. Sometimes it works. And it is a case of like the first time you reach out, they don't know what it means. The second time they reach out, you're not a priority. And the third time they're like, actually, I need this now.
Amazing. And so taking you back to when you were doing your first raise, how did you decide how much you needed to raise? Because I feel like some founders just put out a big number and then you ask for like a breakdown of their use of funds. And it's like, oh, salaries and marketing, but it's not a breakdown. So how did you come to the final figure? Running a business shouldn't feel like you're chasing after it, but receipts are everywhere. Invoices get lost and your inbox never stops. Meet Dext, the all-in-one bookkeeping automation platform that puts your financial data right where it needs to be so you can finally build bigger things. Go to dext.com to find out more.
Great question. And again, I think during the process of, as I said, me talking to investors over the years and iterating, I think we were raising 250, then 500, then 1 million, then 750, then 3. Like it just kept changing. I landed on 350 because I felt that 250, I knew I had of SEIS, and that would make it a lot lower risk for people to invest in and is much more appealing for early stage. And then I was like, I need a minimum of 18 months runway. And what do I need to get me to the point that I can launch an integrated product on a retailer's website and start to prove traction? And again, then I just mapped that out. I had my salary. I had an agency. I didn't have a CTO until year 2 when we were starting to generate revenue, which is always the like hope, right? And I was pretty lean. There was very little marketing. Your question before was about marketing. Didn't really need it because ultimately I was just using my network to introduce me to retailers. So the other thing is when I then launched with the retailers, I leveraged them to message, like to speak about who Persi is, because to be honest, I can go and talk to whoever about Persi, but if I'm not on a retailer that they shop, they're not going to use it. So it was more about reaching their customers to drive awareness. So I had very little marketing. In fact, I think I had none. And then I was like, what else? Like, I just need to live on that limited basis. So that got me to the 350. And then when I had the opportunity to raise more, I took it. And at that point, I didn't actually change any of our spend apart from bringing Matt in. And so I covered his salary. And then ultimately it meant my runway was longer. It meant I could add in extra in terms of tech spend. I could have more flexibility if I wanted to, and a lot more buffer, which actually has also enabled me. I was looking to go out to fundraise a month or 2 ago again, because at the same time I was like, I will get these retailers. And what I realized is it was just taking longer to get the retailers because we'd also launched a new product and we needed to prove that as well. And so what I did recently was go back and go, how can I buy us more time and remove the pressure to raise this next seed round so that we can actually focus on selling and getting retailers in and driving the traction required to close a seed round. And I was able to go in, strip out a whole load of costs and give myself, instead of 6 months, another 14 months. And so I think it's really important to understand when you're building a model and you're raising money, to understand where are your levers that you can scale up, scale down, you can survive longer. And when you're having conversations with investors, that's the most important thing to know is you don't need to have a financial minded to build a model from scratch, but you do need to know where your money sits, where you've got opportunities to put buffers and buckets, and where if you need to, you could live longer.
Definitely. And so when you had all that money from the first raise come into your account, what did you do? Because you've got all this money sitting there, and I would be like, oh, I could go buy a nice handbag. But you obviously can't because it's investor money. Did you put it in different types of bank accounts for different things? How did you handle that?
That's a great question. Well, first thing I did was like screenshot. I've never had that amount of money in a bank account. I was like, oh, and watching it come in was even wilder because it was like bing, bing, bing. And I was like, oh my gosh,
Loaded.
That was very exciting. So the first thing I did was screenshot it and I put it in a folder for a rainy day being like, just remember you did this, which I think is really important. And, you know, had a little like chink chink with my chairman and Matt, like we did this. The second thing I did was I was actually advised to look at putting it into some kind of account that I could get interest in, because having that amount, if I put it in the right place, it could end up paying for someone down the line, you know, an intern or something. I actually was recommended Round. Have you ever heard of Round?
No, tell me.
They are a startup as well. Now, Hatch, one of my investors, use them both for Hatch themselves, but also JK, who is like my main man there. He used it personally. So he was like, I can advocate for them. And they basically, and again, I'm going to speak really poorly to this because I don't really understand it all. But in short, layman's terms for me, they could get me a better interest rate than when I spoke to the other banks, the big guys. And not only that, but they could release funds more immediately. Whereas with the big banks, they were like locking me in. They were saying I could only like, if I needed to get money out, I had to give like 3 months notice. And I was like, I need agility at this point. I'm a startup. If I suddenly need money, I need money. So I went with them and I basically put all of the money in there, bar what I needed for that month. And then I you can set up rules where I'm like, every month I need this amount transferred into my account. And then the only other rule I had was never let me go under this amount. And if so, transfer this directly. And that's been brilliant. They've been brilliant. I think it like averages about a 4-point-something% interest. So it's been really good. And obviously I didn't have in my business model that. So they're like, oh my God, there's all this income that you're not planned for. And I'm like, yeah, great. So I think that's really like worth doing.
Yeah, no, 100%. And then obviously as an accountant, how did you go around the finances of your business? So obviously I'm sure you drew up forecasts and budgets whilst you were raising, but how did you actually implement that and learn to understand the numbers?
I think I'm still understanding the numbers.
It's a learning journey.
So I had been introduced through the previous business to an accountant, and he very kindly supported me before the fundraise, you know, without charging me because he knew where I was at. And therefore the agreement was always that he would come on board, which is exactly what we did. So he helped me build my financial model. I gave him all of the assumptions. We had a couple of sessions where it was like, I think I need this needs to do this needs, and then he would go away, build it, come back. We'd go through it. I would interrogate it, make sure that I felt so comfortable that I understood every single sum, every single reasoning behind the model, so that then when I was questioned about it, I could speak to it. I think that was the most important thing, is that also I could then be going in and seeing how I could move money around if I wanted to, and I didn't always need to go to him. And then obviously I took investments, so I have a board. So I have to report monthly financials just through a digital like system. It's a couple of numbers, which is like, what is your average burn? What is in your bank? You know, what was your spend? Like very basic things. And I submit that monthly. And then we have a board meeting 6 times a year where we then report against actuals versus budget. And I think it just is a really good way of us staying on top of things, especially as things can change very quickly. You know, I heard a lot from investors how they've had businesses, they don't hear anything, and then they get the call going, we're going under tomorrow. And they're like, if you just told us earlier, we might have been able to help you. And I think it's really important. Don't be scared to have those honest conversations, particularly when it comes to finances. Give yourself enough time if things aren't going to plan, and have those very honest, hard conversations early on, because, you know, the fact that I was able to extend my runway last month from 6 months to 13, 14 months has given us so much opportunity where we're like, we'll test this at next board. If we've not done that, we're going to readdress this. And then you go to the next one. And it just, I think, keeps you really accountable to what you're spending and where the business is going.
Definitely. I mean, I sit as a fractional CFO on a lot of companies, and actually those board meetings, as annoying as they are to prepare for, are actually really valuable, because it sometimes, for different boards, it's different things, but you actually bring a lot of like heads of department to them. So you can actually see what's going on in the whole business and kind of understand struggles. Is it late payments? Do you need shortened payment terms? How are you doing in terms of new business? And all these kind of metrics that you've set for yourself, and keeping that accountability. Because when you run a business without a board, it can be difficult because you're not setting those goals so quickly. Like for the accounting firm, obviously we don't have any investment, but we've actually set up internal board meetings every month. And so that almost keeps me accountable to my staff, which is a really interesting thing, but it helps so much.
Yeah. But also your staff accountable. And I think, you might be looking at the goals, but are you also looking at where you're tracking against them? And I think it's having that space that you need to bring that information together and share collectively, and then feedback as to why certain numbers are or aren't doing something in order to go, there's an opportunity there, or like, this is a red flag, we really need to focus on that. And I think, again, it's that accountability, because I think especially in the world now where often we're not always in the same room, in the same office every day, we can go off in silos and kind of, as long as we're delivering what we're meant to deliver, we think we're doing well, but we might not realize the impact it's having on the rest of the business.
Yeah, definitely. And it's nice because I think those staff members that are part of the board meeting, it helps them understand what's going on, because they're just sitting there all day, like doing the work, living their best lives. But actually understanding how a business operates and maybe the stresses or pressures I'm under as the business owner, they can kind of understand and empathize with that.
Yeah, 100%. So I was at a business, Monica Vinada, I used to work for, and one thing I loved that they did, and I learned so much from, was they would share like the monthly numbers, and they would tell us what it meant to us, speaking about the EBITDA and the profit number and how it would impact us as a business and us as individuals in terms of our personal bonuses. And it really kept every individual in that business, which was growing at a rapid pace, really focused and excited. And like, we were learning. I felt like I was being like a kind of a fly on the wall, maybe at some of the board meetings, certainly understanding more around how the business was growing and the impacts of it, rather than just what my job did.
Yeah.
And I think that was a really interesting, and I know more businesses that do that. I think it's a great opportunity for certainly younger members of the team to start to understand how businesses operate.
Definitely. And so obviously, there's a different investor landscape now as there was when you were raising. And so my question to you is, do you think you can raise from an MVP now, or do you need traction, or does it have so many dependents?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when I first started talking to investors, it was 2022, right? And the feedback then was, if you only spoke to us last year in 2021, you could have raised with an idea on a piece of paper. Now you need more traction. And traction means so many different things to so many different people. But for them, they were like, you need some kind of indication that retailers want this. And that could have just been getting retailers to write an LOI. By the time it got round to me actually fundraising, it got to the point where the expectation was you could scrap something together exactly like I did, or scrape something together just like I did. And I think that was the expectation, is if you didn't do that, why? Now the expectation is, with AI and with Lovable, which I remember the name of now, and all of these tools that allow you to actually build tech and websites without being technical, the expectation is you need to actually build and launch and show traction before you can even raise at pre-seed, I believe. And for consumer businesses, even more, the expectations in terms of revenue expectations for consumers at pre-seed is massive. And I was speaking to another founder, and she was really struggling and not understanding why she kept getting this feedback that she needed to hit certain tiers when she'd heard other businesses that did it with no product. And it just came down to the fact that business was a tech business and that hers is a lingerie business. And I think it is really, really challenging. What I'd want to do is in a good way, in a positive way, challenge and encourage founders to lean on all of those tools. There is so much we can do. I understand the expectations are higher, but also you can do so much more. And even for me, when I felt that I couldn't, and I was encouraged that I could, and they're right, when I just put my mind to it, there was a way. There will always be a way.
Definitely. And I also think understanding different types of funding, like there's so many pitch nights that go on where you can find investors or even win grant funding, which is really important.
Exactly.
And just a couple of £1,000s of grant funding means you can actually pay someone to make the MVP for you.
100%. What is important is, well, one thing you've made me think of is I also got a startup loan previously, a 25k. It was with Virgin Startup, and I know British Business Bank do it as well. And it's really low interest. It is against you personally, which I wasn't fully aware of. But anyway, that I think is great because that can give you a lot of opportunity without giving away part of your business, like you said, to kind of get a step up. But I do think there is so much you can do without even raising. And I think what is really important is that if you are clear on the people that you want to take investment from, when they are talking about what are the expectations at this stage, be very clear. They talk about traction. What does traction mean to you? And what does traction mean to you? Because to angels, it can be different. To even different VCs, it can be different. So if you're clear on what they're looking for, you can make sure that you go out and you achieve that in order to come back and have a more successful conversation, which means you'll get that check. So I think that's really important, is don't just take no, or you're too early, or you need more traction. That's often just being fobbed off. Go back to them and say, I'd really love to understand what you would expect or hope to see from someone at my stage so that I can go away and achieve that. Go away and do it, come back and go, I did it, because that always impresses these investors.
Definitely, 100%. And So what was your personal reality of being a early stage female founder? What did that look like? Because I've spoken to so many early stage founders. For a lot of them, it's working full time, then working in the evening on their business. What did that look like for you?
So I was very fortunate at that point. Prior to Persi, at the same time as Persi, the latter kind of 7 years I had my own consultancy. And what that meant is I was able to not only earn a higher day rate, I doubled my salary when I moved from a job straight into setting up my consultancy and working 5 days a week on a day rate. And that was wonderful. And I could save a whole load that when I then had my first baby, I was able to cover myself for a couple of months before I needed to go back to work. But it also meant when I went back to work, I was able to do a couple of hours a day, 2 days, and build that up. I had that flexibility. And then when I started to build and play around with the business, at that point, I was back to doing 4 days a week consulting. And what I did was scale it back to 2 days a week. And the rest of my time, I was then able to build Persi, but I could cover my bills. The reality of being a woman is also, I had to have the babies and I had to manage that. I had another child. I've got 2 boys now. And so I had to juggle that between, my salary being the higher salary as well, which we needed to pay all of these, nursery fees. We had 2 babies in nursery in London at the same time. Absolute killer. I would not advise it to anyone. If you can time it so that doesn't happen, please do. But, just everything else and how expensive life is now as well. So there was a lot of pressure that we needed to cover certain costs at the same time as essentially I was limiting my earning because I wanted to spend the rest of the time building. But I knew I needed to go through that. And actually in the final 4 months before, 5 months, I think, 4 or 5 months before I closed the fundraise, I stopped the consultancy because I was like, this is it now. I need to give myself these next few months to fully focus on the business because it's this, or if not, I then close it, I move on, I decide what I'm doing next. So, I think it's hard. A lot of people are in full-time jobs and doing it. I take my hat off to them. I certainly couldn't have done that and have the kids. So I was lucky that I was able to have that flexibility. But, my dad, I remember he quit. Well, he didn't actually quit his job the first time around. He was fired, a wrongful dismissal, took him to court, won. But in that time for 6 months, he built the business, raised money, and then started it. So he just went, I'm going to do 6 months and I'm going to do it. And then I also know a friend of mine did something similar. She gave herself 6 months. She was like, if I don't launch and raise in that time, I'll go get a job. So it depends, I think, on where you are in your life and what risks you can take. But, if you really want it, you'll find a way.
Exactly. But I think especially in this economy, it's so difficult to save up that amount of money to go, right, I'll give myself X amount of time. I did it with my first business. I quit my job and I said, right, I've got 6 months buffer. And if this doesn't work, then we'll find a job and that's fine. But it's also like such a nice privilege to be able to have your whole entire focus on building one thing. And I think that's really, really important. But did you have any pushback from investors being like, you need to be all in on this and stop the consulting?
No. Actually, because I guess in the plan, it was the whole point of also raising was so that I could take a salary, because I never took a salary in all the years that we were iterating and building and everything. Even when we'd raised family and friends, we didn't take money out of the business. They were comfortable with the fact that I had built in a salary, and I'd built in a salary that was good enough that meant I didn't need to consult on the side. Because I think that's the other thing. And a lot of questions I get from founders are, but what should you pay yourself? What is too high? What is too low? It's a personal thing. I am a woman of a certain age, as in where I was at in my career, what I could be earning. I wasn't going to go and ask for that salary, right? I'm not going to go, well, I can earn this, so pay me this. So it was like half of what I could be earning, but it also was a certain amount that needed to cover the fact that I had a family, I had a mortgage. I wasn't able to take the risk like you said, and my other friend said, where she was living at home with her parents. She had no dependents kind of thing. So they understood that I needed to earn a certain amount in order to be able to fully focus on the business. And so they never questioned my salary. And some people would probably be like, oh, really? I got bartered on it, blah, blah, blah. I never had that. And I really respect my investors for that, to be honest. But I think it's because they knew that would allow me to fully focus and not, some people then are taking jobs on the side. The reality is you're not fully 100% on your business then.
Definitely. And so what is one thing that nobody told you about being an early stage founder that you wish someone had? I mean, there's a book, but top 3.
One thing that no one told me, I think people talk about the roller coaster. And I think you're always like, oh yeah, I'm sure it is, gosh, that's so tough. What I didn't realize was how, I realized a roller coaster, over a period of time, there are highs and lows. What I didn't realize is how immediate those changes would be. And so much so that within hours, I am going through these emotions that I feel, I feel schizophrenic. And my husband's like, whoa, what is going on with you now? I kind of can't keep up. So I think that is really tough, is that you have these extreme highs, you do have these lows. And how do you try to find a way to stabilize yourself in the middle so that you can wake up the next day and go again? And I think, one thing I found that has helped me is not looking too far in the future. Obviously, I know what I'm building building, I know what I want to achieve, but actually what can I do tomorrow and what can I do this week? And that helps me compartmentalize kind of what that roller coaster is. And I think needing then to have those kind of little moments where I can reach that kind of like equilibrium. And for me, it's often fitness or, you know, spending time with my kids and my husband as well and friends, going dancing. Yeah, I wasn't aware of kind of how.
The yo-yo.
Yeah, exactly.
And the last question is, what is a piece of advice you would give to your younger self?
Oh, do you know what? I try and encourage myself to play more with ideas and to have the confidence to do what you did and just give myself 6 months to go and do something, because I always knew I wanted to have my own business. I grew up with an entrepreneurial father that had several businesses and I knew that I wanted to do that. I always said to myself, oh, I'll never be the one with the idea. I realize other people's ideas. And my dad was always like, Liv, you're doing yourself a disservice. And I think I just got quite comfortable in like building my career in marketing, which is I love, but I knew I wasn't going to do that. And so I think I'd have the confidence to take more risks when I was younger because you can afford to. And I think I did it actually probably at the hardest time when I was starting a family, have mortgages and some of the highest costs that we're going through. So I think if you really want that, just have a go and play around with ideas, because every failure is a step closer to the next one. And like, they're not failures, it's learnings. And I'm really reframing that. I know everyone speaks to that, but I genuinely am trying to embody that. And I see it where I'm like, actually, God, look at how much I've learned from that. So just do it.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.